All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robin Sahid. I'm an assistant to the city manager with the city of Santa Clara. And before I get going, I just wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be made available after the session. So if you missed something, don't worry, you'll be able to access it after the session. In my role with the city of Santa Clara, I wear several hats, one of which is leading some of our key economic development efforts, including being the lead on our worker cooperative initiative. While the work on this initiative started prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, this work has become even more urgent as we continue to look for ways to support our businesses through the current crisis and into recovery. On behalf of the City of Santa Clara and our partners, Project Equity, the Democracy at Work Institute, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Worker Owned 101. Worker Owned 101 is the first of what we hope will be several educational sessions for business owners and business service providers about the benefits of the worker-owned business model and why small business owners should consider a transition to worker ownership as a succession option. Santa Clara launched its worker cooperative initiative because we recognize it's vital to support locally owned businesses at risk of closure. Development strategies rarely look at succession planning. And as you will hear later in the presentation, Santa Clara has a significant number of businesses approaching the time when a business owner may begin thinking about their legacy. Worker ownership is an option that will allow owners to retire well while keeping the business locally rooted. By taking this proactive approach, it's our hope that we can keep businesses that have grown in our community here and thriving for the long term. In this session, you'll learn about the business succession model and how worker ownership can help owners retire well, preserve jobs, and help support business continuity. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. From Project Equity, we have Donna Skye, Business Development Manager. From the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, we have Mo Mankling, Policy Director. From the Sustainable Economies Law Center, we have Yassi Eskandari Kahar, who is the Policy Director and Staff Attorney. And last but certainly not least, we have Zen Trenholm, Program and Policy Manager from the Democracy at Work Institute. We will also have a guest speaker later in the program. And with that, I'd like to hand things over to Donna.
Hi everyone, and good afternoon. Yes, my name is Donna Skye, and I'm a Business Development Manager here at Project Equity. I was a long-time food manufacturer and business owner myself, so working with and supporting business owners continues to be something that is really important to me personally and in my work with Project Equity. As a quick overview of our agenda today, we will dig into why and how worker ownership is a powerful business structure for owners, workers, and the local community. You'll hear from a worker owner and the transition journey that her business took along the way. We'll also talk about readiness factors and all the support available in the city of Santa Clara to help businesses transition. We'll also make sure that there's plenty of time for questions. So you can ask your questions in the side panel now or throughout the presentation, and please know that we will make time to answer those questions towards the end of the session. Next slide. So let's discuss why the time is now for worker ownership, which is also commonly called employee ownership. What is employee ownership anyway? Well, worker ownership or employee ownership is a proven but little known business structure in which a broad base of employees own the business where they work. Stock options are the most common form of employee ownership and are usually only available for management. But in contrast, broad-based worker ownership gives all the employees, not only the management, but all the employees, the opportunity to become owners. Next slide. As business owners, all of you already know that COVID-19 has had a big impact on small businesses. And as recently as last month, almost 80% of all business owners said they're still experiencing negative impacts from this global pandemic. To complicate matters more, this is happening at a time when many of you are entering retirement age and considering a succession plan. Next slide. Nationally, there's a silver tsunami happening. Nearly half of all privately held job-creating businesses are owned by people of retirement age. As baby boomers retire, this will impact 2.3 million jobs. 2.3 million businesses and 25 million jobs. So really high numbers here. But the risk of the silver tsunami also creates an opportunity to think about business retention and ownership differently. Next slide. Major impact on jobs and revenue in the city of Santa Clara follow similar trends as other areas we've studied in the Bay Area and other parts of the country as a whole. In Santa Clara, legacy business, there are over 11,000 legacy businesses. 1,100 businesses that have been in operation for over 20 years and account for over 50% of small business revenue. So these legacy businesses also employ 1 in 3 workers in Santa Clara. Next slide. In the Bay Area, and even more so in places like Santa Clara, we may hear stories about big unicorn companies that sell for millions or even billions of dollars. But it turns out, for most businesses, selling isn't easy. Only about 20% of businesses actually do end up selling. And only 15% of businesses have their kids take over via a family transition, a percentage that is not nearly as much as it used to be. As a result, unfortunately, a large number of businesses are at risk of closing down. An exit option, like an employee buyout, can offer another choice for business owners. This type of sale provides buyers from within the business and community, all while providing a fair market price for the owner and a path to keep the company assets and jobs local. Next slide. Working people are not economically as secure as they can be. Financial insecurity hits marginalized groups harder with the racial wealth gap widening during the pandemic. It has become even more clear during this crisis that workers, especially our frontline and essential workers, are not economically secure. Almost half of all U.S. families cannot manage an emergency of $400. And 6 of the 10 fastest growing occupations pay under $30,000 a year. As well, economists predict the increased period of long-term unemployment in the U.S. will happen due to the impact of the global pandemic. Next slide. So now I'd like to talk more about the power of worker ownership and how it can support business owners and local communities. Next slide. Worker ownership can create stronger businesses. Many studies demonstrate that the impact of worker ownership to grow and strengthen businesses has really had lasting impact. Recent findings from the National Center of Employee Ownership show that these companies grow more quickly with an average of 2% revenue and employment growth year over year, so not just a one-time benefit. And a study from the Democracy at Work Institute also showed that these companies are more profitable than their peers in the same industry. Next slide. As well, worker ownership has really important direct impact on the workers. These data points are from another study that shows that worker owners earn a third higher than their peers in the same industry from a wage perspective. So something that's really valuable to people who work in the business and in our local communities. They also stick around in their jobs over 50% longer, which not only creates more job stability and earning continuity for the workers, it also is very valuable to the business. As well, the household net worth of these workers, as measured by assets, is nearly twice as high. So we're talking about some really important benefits to the workforce. Next slide. So we have in our hands another way to think about business succession and ownership transition. Employee buyouts have many benefits to the owners and local community. This type of sale facilitates the owner receiving a fair market sale price for the business that they built with a seller-friendly timeline. It also preserves the business and keeps its assets, jobs, and legacy rooted in the local community. So again, worker ownership has profound benefits to owners, the business itself, and workers. So with that, I'll transition over to Mo to take it from here.
Thanks so much, Donna. So, now that we have a little bit of an intro, I think it's really good to hear about what does this look like in real life, right? So what is the actual experience coming directly from a business owner, probably like yourselves, and get to know a little bit of kind of like behind the scenes, like what does this transition look like, and how does that affect the people that are the workers and potential new owners. So with that, I'm actually going to just transition right over to Nicole, who's co-owner at Technicians for Sustainability, one of our wonderful members of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. And Nicole can share a little bit about her team, which actually, great, thanks, Jason. This is the great team from TFS, and Nicole will tell you a lot more about them.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you, Donna. I'm here to tell my story to you. I'll give you a little bit of a sense of who we are. So as Mo said, I'm Nicole Cook, and I am a co-owner of Technicians for Sustainability. We are an Arizona solar company. We're in our 19th year of operation, and we currently have 66 staff members, 22 of whom are also co-owners with the company. And we're just starting our 5th year as an employee-owned cooperative. That's how we refer to ourselves. We're a worker cooperative. And I was just on a call with a teammate that said a great phrase. She said, "We build solar while building community." And that's really how we've always thought of ourselves since the very beginning. As a solar design build firm, we have staff that work 40 hours a week, every week of the year, in the field doing technical installation, often on roofs in 110-degree weather. But we also have a lot of staff, dozens of staff, that spend 40 hours a week in the office behind a desk at a computer doing sales, design, architecture work, and communication work. So we have a pretty diverse workforce within those 66 staff. But who we were in the beginning was just 2 owner-operators that did everything in the beginning. Eventually, we started to take on staff really in earnest in 2005, and we started to grow as a company. We were owned all the way up through the end of 2016 as a single-member LLC, and that was my husband and I that owned that LLC before we converted. So we knew we wanted to become employee-owned, right? And for us, what that meant, the key pieces were we wanted our company to be owned and governed by the people who work there. That probably includes most of what you think about when you think about ownership. Certainly control, also financial benefit was a big piece for us. But we also wanted those pieces like staying up at night, thinking about how to solve tough problems in the middle of a business crisis, or generating bold ideas when we needed some major improvement in our sector, calculating business risk, right? Those are the pieces we were after. I wish I could see each of you right now and hear your stories, because what I know is likely is that you care deeply about your company, you've put a ton of effort into it, and you want to see others do the same. And that was a big part of what employee ownership was about for us. I mentioned we were owners working on the business. As we began adding employees, after a lot of years, those same employees were still working side by side with us. In fact, the first employee we ever hired still works with us today and is now a co-owner. And although we compensated them fairly and we added really great benefits along the way, it was only us as owners that were continuing to build equity in the company. And we really wanted our staff to be able to weather the storms of life. We wanted them to be able to participate in the fruits of their own labor. And importantly, we really wanted them to participate in have dignity in that decision making that goes along, and the responsibility and the accountability that goes along with entrepreneurship. So we decided we're going to convert, we're going to become an employee-owned cooperative. Some co-ops obviously start that way. We were really a traditional business, an LLC that converted. So as we did that, we had to figure out what our structure would look like. We chose the cooperative structure, and we went about it in the same way you'd go about anything in business, right? We planned for it. We built really good systems to get ready for it. That was about a year of active work. We also sought expertise from others, and we started small. We invited about 18 of our existing employees to become co-owners in that first round. 12 of them took us up on it. In addition to my husband and I, who stayed on as co-owners, that made 14 of us. Over the subsequent years, we have added 10 new owners. If you're doing the math, we also had 2 owners and longtime staff members leave. So we weathered that experience of transitioning co-owners out as well, which was hugely important. And now we've developed a pathway to ownership for the rest of our employees. It is optional for us. We want folks to have the option to be on as employees or to be on the ownership path, but we do have a candidacy program for ownership. So one thing I want to point out that may be a little different from what others might be looking to do, and some of you on this call, is that my husband and I weren't ready to leave the company. We were still interested in being active and part of it. We stayed on as co-owners, which really put us shoulder to shoulder with the other owners. So we're right there along with the other 22. We continue to benefit financially from the success of the company, but now we do so along with all of those other owners, right? And also, I would just add that when we are ready to step away, we feel now today far more confident than we ever would have in the past that the company that we helped build will continue on, not just with great jobs for the folks who work there, but also as a really important part of our community, which is huge for us in our mission. So I'll just give you, in closing, just a little bit of information. Here we are in Q1 of 2021. As I said, we're in our 5th year of employee ownership. We have made patronage allocations 3 years in a row. So that's to say that we have shared profits among owners for 3 years in a row, and we expect to do so again this year. As I mentioned, we've added 10 owners, which is really exciting. We've weathered 2 owners leaving and lived to tell the story. We also beat our record of 15 years straight of number of projects that we had done since becoming employee owned, which was really telling for us. All of our staff, not just the staff that are owners, but all of our staff have more benefits and also higher pay than ever before. So this is our story. It's obviously still in progress. We hope to have a lot of years ahead of us, but I think if you ask anyone in the company, certainly the owners, they would say we count it as already a success.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your story.
Pleasure.
You can see why Nicole is one of our favorites to come and talk, because she's so well about, what is at the root of it, both from the perspective of a selling owner and from the perspective of a business that's been at this for 5 years, right? So as the policy director for the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, I have been working for the last 4 years, specifically within the worker co-op portion of the employee ownership pie. And so a couple things to know about worker co-ops. I'm going to hone in on them pretty particularly for a couple minutes. And so worker cooperatives work really well, particularly for small and mid-sized companies. There are some larger ones as well, but we really see a lot of growth in retail and childcare. A lot of these, you'll notice, are essential worker businesses where typically people have the most insecure pay and the most turnover, right? So I know a lot of small businesses see quite a bit of turnover because, like Nicole's saying, having a piece of the equity is really, really important in order to feel like you're really tied to the business, grounded in it, able to both bring your voice as well as contribute to like the growth of the organization and how business is conducted. So if you can go to the next slide. So a little bit about the worker co-op sector, and I'll contextualize this in the year that we're in, 2021. We're coming off of a really difficult pandemic year, and we took a little bit of a look at how worker cooperatives survived and weathered the storm of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that we really resoundingly we heard was that worker cooperatives are more resilient because everybody's in it to win it, right? Everybody has skin in the game. 86% of worker cooperatives already have structures in place to figure out some of these questions, like how are we going to operate as a retail store or a store where people come in every day in order to make both the workers and the customers feel safe. These kinds of businesses already had plans in place and ways to have those conversations and figure that out quickly as well. During the pandemic, 93% of co-ops who responded to our survey, we surveyed about 250, and most of them responded in this, they kept their workers. So some of them made the decision to reduce hours together or reduce wages together, but to make sure that everybody kept their job. And so some actually even hired or rehired people that they had to lay off. And then one of the things that I am most proud of is 60% of worker owners are people of color, 62% identify as women. Is a very diverse group of people, and a peer network, which I think is one of the really important pieces. Is, you know, when you're making the trip into worker ownership, there's a really rich network and ecosystem of people who are going through the same thing. I get a front row seat to see these people, these peers, like sharing ideas within industries and across them. So there's a really great network of both worker owners to talk to and also people that are available to help, like a lot of the people on this call. So with that, I will kick it back to Donna to talk about additional pathways to worker ownership.
Great, thank you, Mo. So, so at Project Equity, a colleague of mine coined a saying, if you've seen one small business, you've seen one small business. And this is to say that every business is unique, and ultimately the right solution should be routed in your unique goals and circumstances. As a business owner, when you think about succession options, you have choices, and each have their own benefits. But we found that worker ownership is the path that can check off many boxes for you to meet your goals. A succession plan or an exit through worker ownership enables owners to not only preserve the company legacy, receive a fair market sale price, and have potential tax savings, it also helps to keep jobs and company assets in local communities. Next slide. Thankfully, there are examples of worker-owned businesses of a variety of sizes, industries, and structures. This is why one of the most important steps in our process is the initial exploratory conversation or consult call, which many of you can have with me. Most business types can transition to become worker-owned, with the exception of medical groups or other businesses with similar licensing requirements to be part owner. But again, worker-owned companies are in a variety of industries. They also range in size. There are worker-owned companies with a handful of owners and up to several thousand. These companies can also have a single location or multiple location. Next slide. So there are a variety of worker-owned structures to fit your individual goals and needs. Part of our role is to help guide you through the options and navigate which is the best fit for you. In general, the most common forms of worker ownership are ESOPs, worker cooperatives, and employee ownership trusts. The benefits of these structures range from qualified retirement plans for ESOPs to worker-owned co-ops that are fully operated and governed by the workers. Employee ownership trusts are set up to preserve business mission and the jobs for the workers in perpetuity. So looking at things like size, industry, demographics will also impact the decision on which structure would be best to pursue for your business. We can help advise a form or forms of broad-based worker ownership that fit your goals and circumstances. Next slide. So let's talk about readiness factors and support available for Santa Clara businesses. So if you can, next slide. So each business, I want to really preface that each business is unique. So by no means is this an exhaustive list. If you're interested in worker ownership, let's talk. But in general, we found the following to be good indicators for readiness for a company to transition to worker-owned. And this is for existing companies to transition to a worker-owned form. The first is good financial health, because the financing to fund a sale is via a leveraged buyout paid out of future profits. So it's important to have profits and free cash flow available to do this. A strong management bench to operationalize the transition is also important. And as well, a proven track record as a strong business with a history of success and projections for continued success is important too. The goal is to have a strong business to start with that is strengthened through worker ownership. So this is to really set these new worker-owned company to thrive and be set up and positioned for success in the future. But again, each business is unique, so it's really important to have those calls, because as my colleague said, when you've spoken to one business, you've spoken to one business. Okay, next slide. Through our partnership with Santa Clara, there are robust services available to you, including educational events, hands-on technical assistance, transition services, and networking guidance. The outreach events are designed to build awareness and provide informational materials for you. Technical assistance is available to explore, which is the right fit, and this will come via direct consultations, feasibility studies, legal services, network connections, and deeper dive group workshops. There's also transition services available, including financing, legal and tax guidance, deal structure, employee engagement, and continued support for you. So working closely with the City of Santa Clara, there's also additional guidance around effective practices for startups, as well as networking and connecting opportunities with existing worker-owned businesses. For a lot of these services, you can contact me directly, as well as contacting the team that is co-presenting with me today. SELC in particular can provide legal support and attorneys, and the U.S. Federation for Worker Cooperatives can provide peer advisory feedback, assistance, and best practices across worker-owned businesses and regional network building. Next slide. To access project equity services, resources, and events, please visit the City of Santa Clara's website. You can also sign up for a consult call with me on the Project Equity website, and my email can also be found on the city website and at the end of this webinar. The services offered by Project Equity include a 5-stage transition process that begins with informal no-commitment consultations, which can then lead to a formal feasibility assessment and ends with a guided transition process and post-transition support. This process is designed to help guide you whether you have no prior knowledge about worker ownership or are already familiar with it. We can help you explore whether it's the right fit for you. So please, we're here and we're at your service, so just reach out. Next slide. So to dig in a little deeper here, I'd like to talk more about the feasibility assessment. Our work starts with a formal feasibility analysis that is about a 3-month process. And we work directly with the owners and as desired can include a handful of employees. The goal of this is to determine your financial feasibility around what debt burden can your company take on. And then we develop a straw model of the employee-owned entity that can be used to get initial feedback on early commitment from your full employee base and assessment of the management needs upon conversion. So again, this process is about 3 months and it's really hands-on and it's there to really help provide all the information you need to make an informed choice around pursuing and continuing to transition onto employee-owned. Next slide. So before I pass it over to Yasi, I'd like to go over a few key facts about the transition process. So what actually happens when a company transitions? An existing company sells to a new entity with worker owners. So there's actually a sales transaction that happens. The purchase can be financed by a loan taken out by the company and repaid over time through future profits. So the worker owners do not need to have the money now to pay for the company. The business itself takes out that loan to finance the sale. Most transition businesses retain management, often with worker owners electing and or serving on the board. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to the presenter baton over to Yasi.
Great. All right, so we're covering a lot of ground today, but it is just an introductory conversation. So you might actually have more questions now than you did when you came to the webinar, and that's okay. Thanks to the City of Santa Clara, all of the partners on this call actually will be hosting a series of in-depth trainings and one-on-one technical support for you over the coming months so that you can actually get into the details with us on your time scale. So I'm going to highlight a few of the events that are happening next month in March, but we'll be having about 1 event happening per month for the next few months. So please check santaclaracalifornia.gov/worker cooperative. You'll see the link right here on the screen, and also we'll share it in the chat box. Check it regularly for new events because we'll have many more to come. Just the ones in March that are happening next Wednesday on March 3rd, we'll have finance options for your worker cooperative. It can be pretty tricky to get the financing for your co-op. So if you join this webinar, you'll find out what your options are, including some financial institutions that have experience with worker-owned businesses and might be a good choice for you. That webinar will be in English and Spanish. The following Friday, March 5th, there's a worker co-op startup webinar. This webinar is for groups and for people who are at the very early stages of their worker co-op project. And as well, at the end of the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to get 30 minutes of free consulting from the Federation of Worker Co-ops. And then on Wednesday, March 24th, we'll have a webinar on entity formation for California co-ops. So this is an introduction to the pros and cons of various legal entities, and also will help you figure out which legal entity is the best choice for you and for your worker cooperative. So that's just a snapshot of what's happening next month. Again, please check the website for more events. And now I'll pass it off to Zen Trenholm from the Democracy at Work Institute. Zen.
Great, thanks so much, Yasi. And again, thank you all for joining today's workshop. we've obviously shared a lot of information here, and many of you are business owners, right? Exploring these questions right now, thinking about what your future plans entail. But some of you on this call work with business owners, right? And we're working with them to better figure out what those plans are and how you can support them. So this section is directed to you. At the Democracy Work Institute, and of course our partners on this call, we all work closely with business service providers around the country to integrate employee ownership into their toolkits. So again, thank you to those who are supporting Santa Clara businesses for joining today's workshop. We'd love to partner with you on this initiative so we can reach more business owners with these resources. Next slide, please. And so, we have a few ideas for ways we can partner. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but there are many ways in which we can collaborate. First, we would love to co-host an info session for your business member or clients. For example, we're planning a business owner roundtable for early or mid-May, where Santa Clara owners can meet and learn from owners of businesses that have transitioned to worker ownership. Have a conversation with people like Nicole, right? You can tell their story about what it took, what was the genesis of their decision, how did they structure the transition, and what are the ways in which they built culture and management and governance practice into their day-to-day operations to support that transition. So in any case, we'd love to partner with you on this. Other sessions we're planning for the year include a deeper dive into various types of legal entity options for worker ownership, as well as some financing models too. So we'd love to partner with you to get this information, these resources out to your business members and your clients. The second way we can collaborate is around providing a short training for your teams on how to be, what we call a worker ownership guide to help identify and refer owners to our services as part of your standard service portfolio. Business associations and service providers are really critical partners in identifying businesses that may be strong candidates for employee ownership transition. So, all it means to be a worker ownership guide is that you understand a little bit more about what it takes to make a strong conversion happen. What makes a strong candidate for that, and we can work with you on determining how your team can best support an owner to explore their options, and then refer them out to those of us on this call who can take the next step. And finally, kind of a little bit outside of the direct information to owners pipeline, there are many ways where we can make worker ownership a more widely understood and supported option for worker owners. And so we know many of you on this call provide educational, succession planning, and layoff aversion services. And so we'd love to work with you to integrate employee ownership into your aligned programs. We can help shape strategies together, provide some recommendations, and support implementation. And so, if any of these options interest you, please reach out to Robin. Her contact info will be shared at the end of the session, and then we can sit down together and figure out ways in which we can partner around an event, or ways in which we can support you to integrate employee ownership into your existing practice. And with that, we're going to move into Q&A. So again, everyone you've heard speak today, everyone you've heard introduce speakers today, all of us are here to answer your questions. This is your time to pepper us with anything that's front of mind for you. And so please use the questions function in your GoToWebinar control panel. It's the easiest way for us to be able to track it and for other members of the audience to see those questions. So as you're brainstorming some things you want to ask folks, we'll maybe start with one question that I'll pass over to Donna, which was asked earlier prior to the presentation, which is, I think, a really great question. How long does the standard transition to employee ownership process take? So Donna, why don't you take it away?
Great. So in general, we found for the clients that we work with, the transition process can take about 12 to 14 months. A few things can impact that timeline. There's a few phases of our transition services. As I shared, the first is this exploratory phase, deciding whether a company would like to pursue employee ownership and which model could be the best fit for them. But the first formal phase is this feasibility assessment. That takes about 3 months. And that begins at the time that we have all of the information needed to begin to dive into that formal feasibility, to look at the financials, to look at the current management bench, and to build that straw model for what a newly formed employee-owned company could look like. The next phase is the transition phase, and that can take a period of about 9 months, and that's where the design really happens. What would the decision-making matrix look like? What would the board of directors look like? What happens when a worker owner wants to leave the business? Also, what would the candidacy period be? So that process is about 9 months. During that phase, we also help to find the financing for that sale transaction. But at the end of the 9-month period, there is an actual transaction where the newly formed worker-owned cooperative would buy the current company. So there's a sale that happens. So again, in general, we found it can take the whole process about a year. Each company, it does depend on the availability of the company in being able to meet with us to keep this process moving forward.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Donna. So we actually just got another question in, and let's see if I can actually, there it is, okay. Great question. So this is a question by Floyd. And let's see, maybe, yeah, I'll pass this again to Donna, but maybe we would ask Nicole to bring in some thoughts on this too. The question is, what is the typical percentage of employee ownership?
So, So Nicole, would you like to speak to that first, or should I jump in first?
I'm happy to have you start, and then I can add my 2 cents from my small slice.
Yes, so there can be a range. Worker-owned cooperatives can be 100% owned by the workers, but there are some companies now doing partial cooperatives. In general, to have the tax advantages around 1042. Again, I will preface this is not tax advice. I am not a CPA, but the magic number is at least 30% of the business would need to be employee owned.
I guess I interpreted, I may have misinterpreted the question, but I interpreted that Floyd may have been asking what percentage of the employees are owners. So I'll answer it from that angle, just in case that's what you're asking. So for us at TFS, 100% of the company is owned by employees that work in the company, absolutely. Within that, we looked at a lot of models that did require 100% of the employees to also be owners. And because we were converting, it was really important to us that we didn't have that requirement. We had some really awesome longtime employees who weren't frankly interested in ownership. Maybe they were looking to retire themselves sometime soon. So we really wanted to make a space for them and for future employees to work with us and not have to be on the path for ownership. So in case that was the piece you were getting at, I'll just say for TFS, we're currently at about 30% of staff are also owners, with another 10% that are currently in the candidacy process and another 15 to 20% that plan to be in the candidacy process sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. And we imagine that we'll probably always rock in somewhere in that range, somewhere under 75%, with at least a quarter of the company choosing not to be on that ownership path.
Great, thank you. So we got another question actually from Jose. And I think this is a question I'll pass to first Yasi and Donna, and then pass to Mo. So the question is, how many transitions have happened in California and then nationally? So maybe Yasi and Donna, you can talk about California, and then Mo, you can talk nationally.
I would pass it to Donna first.
Okay.
Yeah, so my understanding is that nationally there are about close to 7,000 ESOPs in the country. And I don't have the exact number because it's growing every day, but approximately 700 worker-owned cooperatives across the country.
I am actually just pulling up the latest number so I make sure that I give everybody the latest information. So I can really mostly speak to the worker cooperative piece of the pie. But what we do know is that the number of businesses that have converted to a worker co-op make up about 24% of like the people that we are newly welcoming into the sector. So that means of all the businesses that we knew are like new to the worker co-op ecosystem in the year 2019, that was the last time that we did our census, about a quarter of them came through as a conversion. The rest of them were a startup or some other kind of like self-started situation. And that's out of Donna is right that there's like somewhere around 700-800 we estimate worker cooperatives in the country. That's the 24% number is out of the 465 like established worker co-ops. Those are the ones that have been around for at least a year, have stabilized, are paying people. So that's about the numbers that we can give you at the moment. I do know that it's growing quite a bit over the last couple of years through initiatives like the Workers to Owners Cooperative that I'm sure Zen can speak to a little bit more. That there's a specific initiatives alongside what's going on in Santa Clara that are helping business owners like yourselves to learn more about the conversion process.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. As Mo said, the number of businesses being transitioned to employership is growing, and it's growing exponentially because this option is becoming more widely supported and communicated about. I think as the federal government is starting to make employership transitions more of a priority in the Small Business Administration, and more cities are looking at this as a tool to help anchor and root small businesses in the community for the long term. So the city of Santa Clara is certainly a leader across the country in helping drive this initiative forward, but they also have partners in places such as New York City, San Francisco, Durham, North Carolina, where employee ownership is being used as just part of a standard set of tools that, again, help owners be able to find a buyer. And then, of course, for workers, be able to keep their jobs and ensure that they can have the opportunity to become owners and build assets through business ownership. So I think it's a great question, and we're excited that the City of Santa Clara is investing in this work and that there's a lot of interest in this particular option. So next question, and thank you all. This is great. Again, a lot of follow-ups here. So let's see. Back to Floyd here. So we have a question of, is there an option after transition to be an absentee owner? Yeah, I wonder maybe if Donna or you want to speak to that? And maybe I have a clarification question for you, Floyd, in terms of what you mean by absentee owner.
I wonder, actually, Zen, if it's okay that I jump in, if the question is a little bit about, like, is it possible to be an owner without being an active worker? Mm-hmm. And I think just something kind of broad that I can say is that there are multi-stakeholder scenarios in some worker cooperatives. I think most of the ones that we interact with and that we know about are fully worker owned. And are made up of active workers. I know it looks a little bit different on the ESOP side, because I think in that case you would cash out on your employee stock ownership plan. So there are scenarios where people do invest without having an ownership vote. So most worker cooperatives operate on a one worker, one vote scenario. So if it was an absentee worker, they wouldn't likely get a vote, though the investment might be able to be there.
Yeah, that's great. Floyd, elaborate a little bit and said original business owner transition to non-active owner, which I think you spoke to. I also think there are some deals that have happened in this country where the original business owner owned, of course, obviously the business, as well as the property. And so for some, the sale to employees included splitting the deal between the sale of the property as the sale of the business. And so the business was sold to employees, but the business continued to rent from the original business owner who owns, of course, the property. And so for them, that was part of their retirement plan, is to have this basically a trickle of rent support to help them in their retirement years. So I think there are many ways in which you can explore different types of investments, different types of transitions. And that, of course, as Donna has said a few times on this call, you speak to one business, you really only speak to one business. So when you speak to Donna about your questions and about your scenario, your situation, she can help guide you, provide some examples from around the country that might illustrate what's possible in your circumstances. So I have a question for that's from Jose, that's directed to Nicole. How difficult was it for your employees to adapt to being owners?
That is an advanced question, Jose. It makes me wonder what you've been. It's a really great question, and it's one that we didn't take seriously enough beforehand. We joke now in hindsight that we had a benevolent dictatorship that came from our staff. That's what they sort of said. And some people didn't want to give that up, is the truth, right? Some people really wanted, even though we were a pretty flat hierarchy, some folks didn't, they didn't want those big questions. They didn't want to have to think about that. We were lucky. I think most of the folks on this panel have talked about the importance of a peer support network. And we were really, really lucky to get good advice and continuous advice from other folks that had transitioned or that were cooperatives. And one of the things they told us was really crawl, walk, run, right? And we heard that over and over. And it was good we did, because we needed it in lots of ways. And we were ready to hand the company over. And it really reminded us that people needed to be invited in, but they also needed space to see that they had the capacity to do it, which they did. And to build their own confidence over time. And so that is one of the things. I think you're spot on. It takes some time, right? And some people, they jumped right in and they were happy. We sort of joke that there's like the people that jump right in the pool and the people that wait on the side to make sure there's no sharks in there before they jump in the pool. And we wanted to make space for both. Yeah. I can proudly say that in our 5th year, it's all actively happening. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to that question?
So, and Nicole, I actually have a question for you. Did you have support after, post transition? What were the practices you put in place to build that culture of ownership for your workers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Donna. So I think Mo knows that we had no idea that there were professionals that did this work when we started. We had no idea there was the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. So everyone on this call is already ahead of us, and you have these great experts. So what we were very lucky to have were a lot of peers that were incredibly helpful. But I think our awareness that those even existed out there in the world, those supports, we were probably a year and a half into our formation.
Great. Well, I would like to add too. That's wonderful. You found that peer network and were able to leverage that to grow that within your company. At Project Equity, we also offer services post transition to help newly formed employee-owned companies thrive. We actually, the name of the program is Thrive, and we really intentionally work with the newly formed worker-owner cooperative to build that culture of ownership and to help develop, because being an owner, as all of you know who are owners listening, there's a steep learning curve there, right? So having those skills, understanding, even having financial literacy, learning about what matters when you're voting for a board of directors. These are all important skills that can be developed and learned post transition.
Yeah, great point, Donna. Thank you. So I have a question for Yasi. This is a question from Josh. What are the legal costs involved with setting up employee ownerships, and such as attorney fees?
That can vary a lot depending on who you're going to. There is actually a very wide range of attorney fees because worker cooperatives, as many of you know who are on the webinar, do meet a lot of social benefits, and therefore a lot of attorneys like to provide sliding scale to these types of businesses because of the social benefits and because of the sort of ethics alignment that they have with seeing more cooperatives cropping up, particularly among certain populations. So at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, for example, we are a nonprofit and we have lower fees. Sometimes cities and states can subsidize the costs of your legal fees, which can also be helpful. And there are programs, for example, in the city of Berkeley, where the city itself provides a subsidy to offset your legal costs for co-op transitions and for startups. And that's really something that is pretty exciting to start to see happen. But again, depends on the attorney that you're going to. I can share actually a list of service providers who might be helpful, since worker cooperatives are a special field of practice and not every attorney who works with businesses, typical run-of-the-mill businesses, can answer your questions well. So I'll share that.
Great, thank you, Yasi. But before you do, maybe I can piggyback on what you said about the city of Berkeley to expand that a little bit and ask you a question. What does support look like overall in California, and what support can owners look for in their state and local governments?
Yeah, so I would say there's a combination of things that are already happening and things that are on the horizon that we are hopeful will happen in the short term. So I would say in place already, we are getting the state of California to really recognize and ensure that across the board, all current efforts that exist to support small businesses, any recovery programs from COVID, are accessible to worker cooperatives, and especially worker cooperative transitions, so worker ownership transitions. Really, that tends to be a matter of educating state staff and training them on the specific needs of worker-owned businesses. And it can also just be administratively removing certain unintended barriers for co-ops to access those programs, those grants, those loans, those guarantees, etc. So that's really exciting, and really, I mean, it sounds wonky, but really it's basically saying there's an entire infrastructure already in place to support small businesses. What we are doing, the advocates, who many of them are on this call with us, are pushing hard to make sure that all those services are equally accessible to worker co-ops, and also creating new programs that support specifically worker cooperatives and worker ownership transitions. So that would be outreach and education, things like this that get the word out to business owners who are looking for an exit, to workers who are interested in buying out their business if the owner's trying to exit, providing loan guarantees for cooperative conversions and for worker ownership transitions more generally, and also to subsidize feasibility studies for worker ownership. So those are all on deck. The Worker Owned Recovery California Coalition, or the Work Coalition, is really pushing hard to make sure that that happens this year and beyond.
Great, thank you, Yasi. So there's a couple questions coming in about structure, how things work inside of a business, and then there's a question about some of the steps to transition. So the first one I'll go to is, a question around, does this mean when you become an employee-owned business, does this mean that all the workers are making all decisions all the time? And so maybe, I'll go to Donna first to give us just an overview of like different structures and around management and governance and so on. And then I'd love to get Nicole to speak about your specific experience as an employee in business and how that looks day to day for you. So maybe Donna, take it away.
Great. I'm happy to. So it's a great question. In general, this is a question that we get asked a lot. So there's governance and then there's management. So governance, are more larger type strategic decisions, and for a worker-owned cooperative, also voting for a board of directors. So they can be really customized. That's another great benefit of being a worker-owned cooperative. The cooperative during the transition phase can really customize and determine what are the type of decisions that the company would like all of the workforce to have input in. So something like a governance type decision around voting for a board of directors, that would be a definite. All of the workers would get to vote for something like that. There's even, kind of a saying, one worker, one vote. Everyone has equal power to make that vote. However, the day-to-day management type decisions and who has input in that can be very customized. So there's some solar companies in particular where they've set up their business where they would like more input from the full employee-owned base on decisions that could really just be made by management. So again, it depends on the culture of the company, but input from the full workforce can be as little as, not as little, but primarily just to voting for a board of directors, or it could have other things like whenever there's a purchase that's over a certain dollar amount, we'd like the full workforce to vote on that. Or it could be that we'd like the full workforce to vote on whether a new worker owner is accepted into the co-op. So there's some customization there, and there's variety there, and it does depend on the company. And I'd love to hear how things are at Nicole's company.
Donna gave a great big picture, so maybe I will just offer an illustrative story, which is that our director of our warehouse manager, Sam, when we first brought up the idea of employee ownership, he had worked with us for a lot of years. And Sam was really concerned about just what you're describing, these all group meetings where we all decided on what toilet paper we were going to buy. So the way I usually describe it is to say, the owners may meet to discuss a real big picture philosophy, right? So for our owners, that may be saying, we're willing to pay an extra 10% for products that are produced in an ethical, sustainable, maybe environmentally or socially sound way. That does trickle down to the toilet paper question for Sam, but Sam is empowered in his role to choose whichever toilet paper he thinks is best. But what he does do, all jokes aside, is take that guidance that the ownership body has set out, and he applies that with his employee hat on in the operations realm, right? And he will use that guidance from the owners in selecting the toilet paper. So that's really how that interplays within our company. We have quarterly owner meetings. So we have 4 set meetings throughout the year that are big picture ownership meetings. We meet anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. It's retreat style. There's always good food. We go deep together. We do really important uninterrupted work from our day-to-day roles. And then we have monthly meetings that are financial meetings for owners, and those are totally optional, unlike our quarterly meetings. But folks can pop in and just get a real clear pulse on where the company's at. Certainly, especially if they don't work in a part of the company that's as close to the finances. And those quarterly meetings is where we're setting those big picture philosophies and ideas, that big picture governance and guidance that trickles down to Sam's toilet paper decisions. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think those anecdotes and the illustrative experience are so important for you to understand that, like, governance and management are vastly different things in a worker-owned business, right? And so depending on the industry and your needs, the size of your company, I mean, you can have pretty traditional management structures to more, decentralized collective ones. So, as I think has been shared previously, there are many kinds of worker co-op structures. So figuring out what works for your company and works for your culture is part of the fun of setting up a business, and part of how you shape the structure to meet your needs, and not the other way around. So I think that's really illustrative there. So we're approaching close to the end of our time, but we have one final question, which I think is great, and we might have time for one more depending on how deep we go in this one. But I think I'll pass this to Donna first, and then see if any other folks here have questions. Again, Nicole, you just might be our person who gets into the anecdotes with us. But the question from Josh is, are there any best practices or processes on how to agree to evaluation of a company? So how do you set the evaluation for your business as you think about a sale?
So what we do at Project Equity is we do a debt capacity analysis. And the debt capacity analysis is based on what is the debt that the company can take on in order to finance the purchase or the loans that would need to be taken out to buy the business from the owners. We do also recommend and have worked with companies that do formal valuations, and we recommend that owners can do that. But I guess the key point there is to realize, you know, particularly in Silicon Valley, you know, there may be companies that sell that not only do not have profit, it's a double negative, so they're not profitable, but they could even have a loss. You know, I come from a food manufacturing, and I know there were some companies that sell and they've had a loss. To transition and to do it via leveraged buyout, there needs to be that free cash flow there to make payments to buy the business. So you know, valuations, there's different types of valuations, and you know, this is a debt capacity type purchase, you know, recommendation for a purchase price.
Excellent. Yeah, if anyone else wants to speak to that. Okay. Wow, that covers, I think, the full breadth of everything we presented today. So, you know, I want to thank those of you in the audience who have been sticking with us for the full hour plus and really drilling down into very specifics. You know, this obviously we can give a nice overview of things. We can talk about processes of stage thing, but it's going to be totally unique to your business and your needs. But there's some principles at play, right? There's some key elements at play, and there are very smart and experienced folks on this call who know how each step of that process works, and there are folks you can talk to about their own specific experience in making this happen. So, you know, the City of Santa Clara has been a fantastic host in bringing us all together to, you know, bring in our various resources and expertise to be able to assist you in, you know, exploring how this might work for you, your workers, and, you know, obviously for the communities of Santa Clara. So again, we're here to be a resource. We're here for you to reach out to with any questions that you may have as you explore this a little bit further. So I think, you know, so next steps here, and then I'll pass it to Robin to close this out. So as has been shared previously, right, to learn more, please visit the city's website. It's got a lot of resources. It's got contact information. It's got, you know, places where you can access events that are coming up, you know, probably host this recording. I mean, there's, you know, go there. It's our landing page for this initiative. If you want to sign up for a free consultation, guess what? You can do that on the website, but you can also send an email directly to Donna, and you see the email there. Again, we're talking free consultation supported by the City of Santa Clara to make this possible for you. So highly recommend taking advantage of that if you're curious about what the next step is. And then if you're interested in partnering with those of us who want to work with you to get this information, these resources out to your business members or your clients, please reach out to Robin. She wants to be able to connect us all together and be able to help shape something that works for you as service providers and membership associations. So let's partner. If this is something that interests you, even if some of the ideas are shared, we're like, don't know how that might work, but if you're still curious about this enough to figure out how it can work for your members, let's have a chat. We'd certainly want to work with you this year. We're excited to do so, and we have some ideas that might work. So with that all being said, I'll pass to Robin.
Thanks, and it's actually a perfect segue. We're really fortunate here in the City of Santa Clara. We have a lot of our business support, you know, in our community, a lot of resources of people wanting to partner and help our initiative. Like, for example, Mission College, I know, is working on possibly offering classes in the future to businesses. So we're very fortunate here in Santa Clara to have that kind of support. So with that, I'll go into closing. On behalf of our team, I really want to thank you for spending a portion of your afternoon with us to learn about this business succession model. To our business service providers on the phone, I know there's many of you. I want to thank you for all that you do for our business community. To our business owners that are on the or listening in, thank you so much for spending some time with us, especially during these difficult times. I hope you've all found this information informative, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. And I just want you to know that we're here to help. So we're excited about this initiative. So please contact me, contact those on the line, and we'll be happy to help. And if you're interested in partnering, like Zen said, give us a call. And have a great rest of the afternoon.